All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join our webinar here today, talking about the next version of BC Estimator that we just sent out and made available. It's version 4.11.10. So you should have received that, I think it was yesterday that was made available to you. And so glad you could join in here. I'm going to point out in your webinar control options, you should have an option to be able to send in a little chat message if you have questions along the way. We'll try to get to some of those if we can do that during the webinar if you have questions about some of the things we're talking about. And if not, we can follow up with you afterward and answer any questions that might be remaining there. So I'll go ahead and get started here. Maybe somebody can just put a little message in your chat window there and let me know if you can hear me and you can see my screen all right. Let's make sure we have those two sides covered. So maybe somebody can send me a message. All right, looks like somebody there is seeing us, so that's great. So to start with, we're going to starting over in the profile just for a quick minute here. For those of you who make use of presets, just one small improvement that we made in this last release relates to presets, comes for importing and exporting. If you go to the presets tab and you wanted to export your presets to use in an alternate template, you can click the export button, and now you actually have control over which presets get sent out. So if you were looking for a very specific one or just 2 or 3, you can now control that export process and send those out that way. So control of exports for presets is now more flexible. Coming over to the plan tab, several different options that we have added in. To start with, one related to just a simple thing related to call out lines. Some of you have found a need to be able to draw more call out lines within one operation. Previously, when you came to the call out line, and I'm referring to this tool up here in the toolbar, when you drew a call out line and you started that process, you would be able to draw one call out line and then the command would end. But now we've changed that behavior so that if you start the call out line process, you can click and draw, and you will remain in that drawing mode so that you can continue to draw more lines as required. So if you find that need to be drawing more at once, we've changed that behavior now for the call out line. Looking further down, another thing that we've introduced relates to drawing containers or drawing areas. And we've introduced a new way to be able to draw them, and that is basically a rectangular draw of a container. So I'm going to use a floor container to demonstrate this. And if you left click on the tool, then you get the standard behavior as you always have. But if you hold down the shift key while you start the tool, you'll now be, if you look at the tooltip, you'll be in the container rectangle mode. In this case, you can just click one corner of the container and you can drag and you will be drawing a rectangle or a square and click the other corner of the container. And then you, by 2 clicks, you've actually put your floor container in. So for maybe more straightforward areas, just like little box areas, you can draw that more quickly. Same would be true for roofs and is also true for the area tool. And I'll also point out that in addition to that's working with just the basic tools by holding the shift key down, you can also leverage that same functionality if you right click on your tool to get to a preset. And while you select that preset, you hold down the shift key. Again, you will be in that same mode. And also, just to point out that if you right click on a container and you were to do draw more sections like this, again, if you hold down shift, you would be able to activate that same concept. And it looks like there was a question about whether or not that would work with the roof, and yes, it would. So if here the roof tool, I can select that, hold down shift, and I could draw a roof area in that same way. And so then you could just set your FOL line your framing orientation line to the direction that you would want your joist to go. So that's the box or rectangular draw option. And there was also a question as far as which way the framing runs, and yes, initially their only option is for the framing to run left and right on the page. So as far as the current functionality, that's where it's at. But then, of course, as always, you can adjust that to the direction that you would want your joist to be running using the FOL line. Moving along to another feature, I'm going to change pages here, and we've introduced the ability to draw an arc for linear lines. So linear lines would be the ones that are the multiple point lines, so something that you might use for rim or blocking in certain conditions. So I'm just looking at this this line here. It kind of goes along this direction, and then it arcs up over here, and then continues on to the other side of the building. So if I wanted to get the perimeter or the lineal footage that goes around those areas, I could do that here with the linear tool. I'm going to click on the linear tool, and I'm going to come, let's see here, make sure I don't get lost. I'm going to come start my line here. I'm going to click here at the start of that arced area, and then I'm just going to go straight on through, click the other end of that arced area, and finish up at this corner. So I've got those in place, and now I'm going to come to this line here in the center that represents both ends of that arc. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to choose to change that particular segment to an arc. And when I do, the line arcs, and I also get an additional, what we will call a control node here. And I can drag this control node out and place it anywhere along that arc. And now I've got that arc that's following that path. So I've got that total 27 feet to cover the arced area, as well as the 19 and the 7 on each side. And I can have multiple arcs in a particular linear segment. I can click this one and make this an arc, and perhaps drag this node down this direction, so then I can get both of those items in there as well. So arcs are available, and that's for the linear tool specifically. Another, going back to this upper floor plan that we have drawn in on this example, oops, we've introduced the idea of ortho node movements. So for example, let's say here I drew these beams in, this one right here, and it's a little bit short. It actually needs to be extended down. And previously, if I was to click on this node and drag, I would get this behavior like what you're seeing on my screen right now, where the node doesn't snap to anything in particular. It just allows you to move it wherever you want to move it. But in this new release, what we've introduced is the ability for you to hold down the Shift key, which then puts that node drag operation into more of an ortho type mode, where it's going to snap to the perfectly vertical, or if you were going this way, perfectly horizontal positions. So if you wanted to hold that line and have it keep going straight down, you could do that and have that adjust that way. So that's the ortho node movements, and that applies to both single node movements as well as to multiple node movements. So for example, if we wanted to just shift, say, this whole cantilever right here out, down, and keep it in an ortho fashion, then we can, we'll hold down control and select both of these nodes and drag them down. Again, without holding shift, the nodes kind of float anywhere, but if I push shift down on my keyboard now you can see that they are starting to follow that snapping or that ortho movement. And I can drop it and let go, and they move down in that direction. So again, ortho node movements activated by using the shift key on your keyboard. Finally, one more option that we've introduced over in the digitizer here relates to a way to more easily double link items. Delete these 4 containers. And I'm going to just draw in just a simple little container up here. And this was introduced for some people, especially who are making use of or drawing units for like multifamily projects or high density housing type situations. where the blueprint calls for a specific set of units, and it draws out the single units, and then they want to actually multiply those out into multiple places. So if this simple little drawing here, I'm going to just make this a beam and give it a product, and I'll do the same thing here with my floor container, my floor joists, and give them a product as well. Okay, so I'm going to take these and I'm going to move them. This feature already previously existed where I can select all these members. Oh, and maybe I'll check my rim here as well and give it a product. Okay, so I'm going to select all this material. I'm going to right click and I'm going to move it to a different location. I'm going to move it to list second floor framing. All right. And so let's just say this is unit A and I've put it into the unit A second floor framing. And maybe, so over here, I'm going to come to my list tab here. And maybe what this really was supposed to be was, for unit A. So second floor framing for unit A. And maybe unit A shows up on the second floor. You add a multiplier here, it shows up 6 times. So now in my reports, I can easily get to, okay, even though I've drawn unit A once, I can multiply it out 6 times. And maybe on the third floor then, they also had unit A being used. And rather than drawing it out over and over and over again, you wanted to just be able to link that same thing that you've already drawn into the third floor framing unit as well. And in that case, on the third floor, it was multiplied by 9 times because that's how many times that unit was used. So previously, there wasn't an easy way to link that one thing that you had drawn into both spots or both locations, to have that actively there. But now we have introduced a way for that to happen. So we're going to select these items again. And so you can see over the takeoff items list, here they are. And it's showing them as being linked to unit A and further down, unit A and unit A. But now I'm going to right click, hold down Control and right click. And the new option that's available is to copy the selection to pack. And I'm going to go to my list and I'm going to say, so in addition to this being in the second floor framing, unit A, I also want to link this stuff to the third floor framing, unit A. So it's the same stuff on the page. I just want it linked in multiple places in my list, and I want to do this in a batch operation. So I'm going to select third floor, unit A, and we'll see what happens here. When we did that, you can see in the takeoff items list that we now have, here's my beam. It's linked to the second floor framing unit A, but now it's also linked to the third floor framing unit A. So it's been linked in both locations, but I've only had to draw the thing actually just a single time. But I can, in a batch operation, make that connection. Now, all of this could have been done previously just simply by creating child items and manually linking each item back over to the different pack. This just provides a batch operation to do it. I will point out that one current limitation with this feature, depending on how you're using this, if you're going to be using this in the framing layout environment, the framing layout material list is going to report the material from both packs. And let me show you what I mean. So here, if I just take a quick look at, or a quick screenshot of this, or a quick framing layout, from the framing layouts, click a new one, we'll call this new unit A. And it warns me that there's 2 packs involved, which is fine. Here's my area, but notice up here that since my item is linked to 2 different packs, I'm getting the material from those 2 different packs. So I have 2 beams, one for each pack that's involved. So that's where there is a current limitation. We're considering possibilities of how to give you the option perhaps to only report from 1 pack. So if you just wanted your framing layout to only show the material that's needed for a single unit A, you could perhaps do that. But again, just kind of want to make clear of there is that limitation at present, but you have the option to batch set things to multiple different packs. All right, moving on to the list side of things, we've added in a few other features there. One is that when you copy a pack, you now have the option to retain links. So you can see here is my second floor framing that I have drawn. And let's say I wanted to copy this pack. I'm going to choose copy pack. And you had these options previously, but the one that's new is to retain links. If you make this selection, we'll click OK. We'll rename this so it's easy for us to see. Click OK, and it will copy that pack. And notice then what happened is now instead of just getting inputs, which is all you could have gotten before if you had selected retain inputs, but no linked items, now those items have actually been linked over to this particular pack, and child items have been created on the other side as well. So you have the option to retain links as you do those. Going on to another feature over here, we allow you to now apply a list multiplier for your reports. And this may be especially important for those of you who make use of BC Connect. So previously, you had the option to come to a pack and to add a report multiplier like we were just doing before. And you get this notation here, report multiplied in 5 times. Also previously, over in the Reports tab, you could come to a specific report that you wanted to run, and you could edit it, and you could come to the list settings here and choose which lists you wanted involved, and you could add a multiplier to that list over here. So those features both still exist, but as we consider things, especially for those who are in the BC Connect environment and want the material list pushed up directly to BC Connect without actually making use of one of these reports, we felt that they actually needed to have access to a more standard list multiplier. And so that's what we have introduced now is you can come to a specific list, right click on it, and choose to have a list multiplier. So we could set this to 5. And again, you get that notation for that particular list. Now, I will point out, as this was the case before with the ones we had, multipliers will compound on top of each other. So meaning, if I have a first floor framing pack here and I've multiplied the first floor framing times 5, it will do that in the report. In addition to that, since building 1 has also been asked to be multiplied 5 times, that means first floor framing is going to get multiplied 5 times again on top of the multiplication that has already happened. So in reality, the first floor framing pack in this case is going to get multiplied a total of 25 times. And then of course, if you had multipliers over in the reports tab, like we showed you before, that it would compound that again. But for BC Connect users, list multipliers and pack multipliers will both now be affected or will affect the material list that is sent up to BC Connect and then can be passed on through the system. Okay, continuing on to just a small feature that we've added into the reports area. If you click on the edit report button, one of the new features that we've added in here that you can control is to use zero waste. Basically a way to temporarily or to create a report that overrides the waste factor for your project. So simple example, we click view right now and we scroll down, we can look at the second floor framing if you can see this. And you should see that here we have some rim and we have 775 feet of rim that's involved. So now if we close this report and let's change the settings for this to be a zero waste factor report. And we'll view this again. And let's take a look at now what we have for that rim. Come down here to the rim and notice that the rim has been set to 750. So let's go back to the list and take a look. And let's see here, and that's because of the multiplier that's been involved. But you can see that it would be 155 times the multiplied value, which is hard to see. But Point is the waste was removed. And so even though the waste still exists of 3%, it's still in the list, and if you ran any of your other reports, the waste would be applied for those. So you haven't lost any of your settings. It just allows you to run a report and see what it would look like if you were just to eliminate all of the waste. Another feature related to reports is that if you choose to view our report one more time, we've got a notes page here with a few of the notes that we've attached to the project. If you export that report to Excel, so we'll just do that here real quick. One of the improvements that we've made is if you have notes that are a part of your Excel export, or you have notes that are a part of your process, those are now a part of your Excel export. Down here, there's an additional tab for notes. And if you go to the notes tab, those notes will be placed in there for your the people that you might be sending that off to. Also, an itemized list area, you can see that we also added in the note above references line number 2 and so on, those items that are also present in the actual report. So we've got that feature in, and then one other item related to notes applies to the framing layouts. Near the top of the framing layouts in the control bar, or the toolbar, you have the option to include an extra notes page. Let's look at our upper floor framing plan here, and we're just viewing a framing layout that we previously created. So nothing too different or weird here. It's what you would expect. But if we were to turn on this checkbox here and choose to view it again, there will be an additional page that's added at the front with all of the notes that may relate to the material that's in this group of framing layouts. So this would be true if you had a collection of 10 layouts that you had created for, say, a large high-density job. Then if you were to check that box at the front of that whole collection of layouts, you would get all of the notes listed here for all of the material reports that were run for all those particular framing layouts. So just an easy way to provide a nice cover sheet with all of the notes about the project, but you still have the options to set them or put them directly on each individual layout as well. Okay, so finally, we get back down to the last feature that one of the ones that we highlighted for you in the email that we sent out, and we're excited to get out to our different users, and that is the quick check feature. So I'm here in the project tab, and you can see that over on the left-hand side that we start with the general tab, which is the order of these tabs is kind of intentional. It's kind of a progression of your project from left to right. So you start in the general tab to enter in appropriate information that might be needed for your job. Then you're working into your lists of how you're organizing your material, where stuff is being kept, and you're building out your material list. Then notes that you're making about the project as you find them, as you work your way through. And then further down, framing layouts, reports, and publish, basically the output of the job. But before you get there, we've inserted this new tab called Quick Check feature. And the intention of the Quick Check feature is to help elevate or heighten the quality of your estimating work that you do without really costing you much more time to do it. The idea is two different sides. One is the general information side, and for most of the BC Estimator users, this information may not be too many situations where we provide much information here. I'll just demonstrate how this works. And right now there isn't anything to show, and I'll show you why. So the options that you have right now is for you to see a summary of the floor decking that may be used in the project. So there wasn't any in this particular project, or the landing decking. And let's just add some in real quick just so you can see how it works. Let's come to the second floor framing. We're going to add application. We're going to come to floor decking. We'll just throw some in here really quickly. And we'll call it 400. And we'll come back to the quick check feature. Notice nothing's here yet. That's because the quick check feature is not a live interactive feature that just updates all the time. You just need to hit the refresh button. So we'll do that for this general information side. Now that we have floor decking, it's going to tell me this is what you have reported on. So currently the options are for floor decking or landing decking in BC Estimator. But of course, if you think of other things that you would like to see reported to you in that area, that would just help you in summarizing your job and seeing that, certainly let us know and we'll certainly consider about adding those in. But perhaps more useful, or more to the point for where many of you are coming from, is the quick check feature provides an opportunity for you to check for potential errors, things that you may have inadvertently done, just almost silly mistakes, things that just go by that we all look at from time to time and say, man, how did I do that? But they do happen from time to time. So how can we catch those? So I'm going to hit the refresh button over here to check for potential errors. And it's going to go through the project, and it's going to look for different things that might be wrong. Just to take for an example here at the top. First, you'll notice that the items are organized by list, by pack, and in this case, by plan. So these are kind of 3 different categories of types of errors that might be there. So here's a simple one, a missed application. No headers called anywhere in the list. Which list is this talking about? Well, it's building 1. Now, maybe this wouldn't apply to you. Maybe it would. But in this case, the software went through, looked, and said, oh, there's no headers anywhere in building 1. Are you sure that's right? And so it brings that to your attention. Now, maybe you like that rule because most of the time you call headers. And so you would want to be flagged about that. Oh, look, I forgot that. But maybe in this job, it's okay. So you have the option to just dismiss a rule and say, or an error that's popping up and say, okay, normally, yes, check for that, but in this case, it's all right. So to dismiss an error, you can come over to the icon itself. And if I hover it over it, it says click to ignore. I'm going to click on that. And notice that the item, it grays out. It's still there. You can still kind of be reminded about that fact, but you also can see that, yeah, I looked at that. It's okay. It's no problem in this particular case. So similar things with stair stringers. Let's look further down here under pack. You can notice another one. Here in my building 1 first floor framing, I've called 11/7/8 floor joists, but there's no blocking material with matching depth. Or here's another one. I've called 11/7/8 floor joists and no rim material with matching depth. Those could potentially be issues. Something that might need to be considered of, hey, maybe I'm shipping 14-inch rim with 11/7/8 rim or something like that. So you get, that gives you a little bit of an idea. Now, you also have a settings field over here for this side where you can set what errors are being checked for. So here in the rule manager, you can control that again. And so you can uncheck and check the rules that you would like to have applied or checked on your projects for you. And this is something that you can save in your base template file so that this is not something you're checking every time, but rather something that you just set up once. And for all your jobs moving forward, you have that behavior. So you have the option to check and uncheck them here to make them active or inactive. So for example, here's that headers one. I'm going to uncheck the one about the headers missed. I'll uncheck it and I'll click done. And notice now that one that was at the top, it's now just completely gone because now we're not even going to bother checking that rule anymore. Now I can come back to settings. Notice it's just unchecked, but I could also reactivate this again if I wanted to. But I also have the option to just delete it altogether. I could just delete that rule, and now I'll just never look at it anymore because maybe it just never applies to me. Do the same thing with stair stringers. Click delete, click yes, done, and those stair stringer warnings now go away. So one of the things that we recognize is that all of you, even though in some ways you guys do a lot of the same things in your businesses, you also have different ways that you go about them, you have different approaches, and you have different needs just for your different areas of the country. And so because of that, we recognize that users need to be able to control the tools that are available to them. So coming back to settings, in addition to those controls that I just showed you to be able to customize the existing rules that we've built in for you, we also have created up here a rule creator where you can build your own type of rule that you would like to implement into your projects. You can actually get the behavior that you want. So I'm going to choose this rule creator option. And I'll just quickly demonstrate there's many options that you could apply here, but we'll just look at one. So the process comes in 3 basic screens that you have to just answer some questions about. It's really not too complicated, pretty easy to work through. First is, where do you want to test for an error? And if we hit the drop-down list, there's 3 different options. First is the project as a whole. You can see the example there. Did I call headers somewhere in the project? So if you had multiple lists, building 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, if you were checking something at the project level, like did I call headers somewhere, it's looking for a header to show up somewhere in the project, somewhere in some list, someplace. And as long as it does, then the rule is satisfied. Or do you want to check this at the list level? Meaning, I want you to check every single list in my project and make sure I called a header. And so that's kind of at the list level. And finally, where probably most of the rules that you'll find their value in is going to be at the pack level, where you want something to be checked in every single pack to make sure that something is being done correctly. So let's just pick that as my option for where we want to do that. Click Next. And now it asks, what kind of rule do you want to create? Again, lots of options here to choose from. We won't go over all of these. You get the idea of some of them, but let's just pick one. Let's pick one like this one right here. If one type of application is used, a related application is also used with the same product. And so if you're wondering about some of these rules, just select them, and you can see here's a common example that is suggested as, hey, this might be a way that you want to use this rule. Give you an idea. So we'll select this one, and then we'll come to the next button, and we'll get to that final screen. So based on what you've asked for so far of, I want to create the rule for here, and I want this kind of rule, so you get reminded in this third screen of this is the type of rule you're going to create. So here are the settings you need to make. What's the primary application? So let's say that we want to check that if I'm calling, let's just say if I'm calling floor joist blocking, that there should be, in that same pack, there should be at least one application somewhere of a floor joist that's using the same type of material. Because in my area, it would just really be wrong if I sent floor joist blocking of one series and that series didn't even exist anywhere in that same project or in that same floor. So I could check for that. And then once you make those settings, you can come down here and read a sort of an English version of what you've asked for. So here's the result. If the floor joist blocking application is used, make sure that the floor joist application is used in the same pack with an identical product. So I look at that and say, yeah, that sounds right. I'll click Create Rule. And now that item gets added in to my pack level. In fact, here it is. Floor joist blocking should include floor joist with identical products right there. And so that product has been, that rule's been run. And we can click Done. And we can look in the pack area, and we must have passed in that case for this particular product. So there's no error that's showing up for that. And then down here further would be items for the plan that we also indicate, like maybe when you haven't linked something that you've drawn, and draw your attention to that. And then over here under the page, you can find where specifically that item is at. So we encourage you to get into that quick check feature a little bit, create some rules that are more custom to your specific business or that actually might be helpful to you. And then also, if you find kind of what I was mentioning about the general information area, the same would be true for the potential errors. Obviously, you have the way to create your own rules, but if you think of just a whole different type of rule, one that we haven't really given you the avenue to create, a whole different type of rule that you would want to be able to check, we'd love to get your feedback on that and make this feature even that much more effective for our users out there. So that's the features that we have available and we're wanting to make you aware of with this release. So again, that's version 4.11.10 that you should have if you've installed this version. So thanks for joining in. And if you know of somebody that didn't make The webinar today, we did record the session, so they can just write into us and we can provide that recording to them and they could view it at a later time. So again, thank you for joining in, and look forward to hearing from you about what your feedback is on some of these new features. Have a great afternoon.